What's up, guys? Welcome to another edition of Before the Whistle, presented by BRK Insurance Group. If your business is looking for the best in employee benefits, commercial property and casualty insurance, or retirement and 401k plan services, there's no one better suited to meet your challenges and build a plan centered around your needs than BRK Insurance Group. What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to Before the Whistle. I'm your host, Maddy, and while I wish I could be doing a victory post-game recap here of Tulane's trip up to Oklahoma, alas, I'm not. That's just kind of how the game of football goes. Tulane, a few different calls here and there, a few ways the ball bounces, and we could be talking about a team that is 2-1, perhaps 3-0 if they were able to kind of pull that out at the end of last week's game. But we're not. We are talking about a team that is 1-2 that went through a gauntlet. And I think that ultimately there are a lot more positive takeaways than there are negative over the last 2 weeks. And, not to be an overly toxically positive kind of thing, because I know it's just this team has passed moral victories and things feeling good despite a loss. Losses hurt. And this is a team that wants to really compete for big goals this season. But ultimately, this is a very mentally tough team, and mentally tough teams really can't get caught up in what the last couple of weeks of football have looked like. It's something that I can break down, but it's also something that I'm not going to get caught up with either. You go up against teams that have way more time on task, are in just power conferences, and you have a hostile environment. It was the loudest stadium I've ever been to as a sideline reporter. There was a little bit of a size mismatch, and it all showed. But what I think showed more than anything is that this team finally has an identity. And you can call it what you want. You can look at it from a football perspective. What I see is a team of fighters and a group of guys who really love each other. And I know that every team fights. It's something that's been a moniker to me of Tulane teams this entire time that I've been the sideline reporter. You look back at the Cotton Bowl, there's no way that they win that game without just really believing in themselves. But I think the fact that that's carried over, despite really not having that many guys left to have that perspective and bring that leadership over, I think just says a lot about what this team has been able to accomplish, despite just only winning one football game thus far. So I'm going to kind of break down this Oklahoma game, what's kind of went wrong for this team, and not, I guess, how little it matters, but in the grand scheme of things for this team's goals, I think that you learned a lot of lessons in these games, and they have experience that is unparalleled. You look at the past couple of seasons for Tulane, they won the big one in Kansas State. That was really important for them. That was their only opportunity until the end of conference play to really be able to show their stuff. And that was when they had a lot more kind of powerhouses in the AAC. Last season, they get the one opportunity against Ole Miss. It slips away from them, and that whole season kind of felt like this almost what would have been if they beat Ole Miss. Oddly, it seems to matter less, even though Tulane has played back-to-back opponents, where they did get two opportunities to get it right. They also had two opportunities where they showed that they can hang with a team down until the final minutes of the game. And it doesn't matter if they're in the SEC, if they're in the Big 12, if they're on the road. That, to me, is where you've really seen this team fight, and the way that they've all just kind of come together and given this team a chance to win both games now in a row. That, to me, has been the really best takeaway of all, and that's what I'm going to focus on today's episode. Before I get things rolling, I just want to quickly shout out something that happened on the field at Saturday. Very surreal moment for me. I believe we were getting ready to start the game, and the sideline at Oklahoma, from here to my computer is where the fans were. I have a very good ability to tune people out. I have my one headphone in, so I didn't really hear what any of the Oklahoma fans were saying. But all of a sudden, I hear Maddy get yelled super loudly. I turn around, and there's several Tulane students there in their striped overalls saying that they're big fans of Before the Whistle podcast. If you're listening right now, that really made my day, and it really meant a lot to me. It was just a really cool moment for me that this podcast has reached the student body of Tulane. That, to me, has just been really special, and special to hear that. But watching the students and the way that they have just bought in to this football team and this program in these last couple of seasons, but really this year more than anything, the fact that there were students that made the trip all the way to Oklahoma in the week of a hurricane and are following along with this podcast showed up in the way that they did in their first couple of games. It's just been really awesome to watch. So I just had to kind of get that out of the way before I go over where I think, if I'm going to be a little critical of Tulane over these last couple of weeks, it's that they had both games in their hands. However you kind of want to call it, there were opportunities in both of these games to win. And if you kind of go back and look at just all of the mistakes that piled up through those couple of games, you look at a few critical plays, and as I said, you could easily be talking about a completely different record here. The penalties are something that have really just been an issue for Tulane through 3 games. I really want to provide, again, context here that I am almost looking at this Oklahoma game, especially with respect to the false start and those kind of penalties, as the environment was, it was, again, I used to go to the Superdome when Drew Brees was in those kind of prime time days, and you could not hear anything other than just this absolute roar the entirety of the game. It was so loud in that game. There was just no ability really to communicate. Just a lot on a young offense's shoulders. But just want to pull this up as I kind of made a chart of it yesterday. It just putting a young offense in that position, especially a young quarterback, having those types of penalties, it's really just not good, putting them in a good spot. But this weekend, I think, is going to be a little bit more manageable of an environment. So it's something that you really want to see get cleaned up. But just looking at these penalties through the last couple of weeks, they have done a lot of damage for this team, who have had 25 penalties now through 3 weeks. 7 of those have been false start penalties, and 5 penalties on offense came last week. And you just really can't be having that through these first couple of games. Just the amount of drives for Tulane that have started out 1st and 10, and then all of a sudden have become 1st and 20, 2nd and 20. It really started to take a toll in last week's game. I just released an article on Tulane on Sports Illustrated kind of detailing how the penalties went in this game for Tulane, but there are a few key situations that stuck out where finally, where they started to drive, all of a sudden there'd be a key penalty. And a lot of the mistakes, the sacks, the turnovers that you've seen from Mensa, a lot of them have come on drives where these penalties have just made it pretty impossible. The play calling changes, and you're just really not doing yourself any favors as a team starting off like that. There was one false start penalty that turned a manageable 3rd and 8 into a 3rd and 13. Then they threw a 12-yard pass, and I think it ended up being a delay or something on 4th and 1, where it became therefore unable to kind of complete that drive. If you don't get that penalty, that pass goes well over the 3rd down marker. The same thing happened on the next drive after that. They had an illegal formation penalty, and instead of having 2 yards to gain on 3rd down, they get brought back to 2nd and 10. They can't convert it. It just kept setting this offense back. And we saw that happen with the field goal kick. It turned into an additional 5 yards. Those types of things just start to pile up. The penalty with respect to targeting on Bailey Despainey, I'll be entirely honest, I don't understand the penalty at all. If the one in the Cotton Bowl where Deuce Watts and another player were both knocked out cold, it's not as if the player that hit him was unable to re-enter that football game for any safety perspective. I hope he didn't, at least. With the way that their eyes just looked on the side of the field. To me, that's what we're trying to prevent here, is actual head injuries that are really going to do some damage. But I get in the long run, if you're going to overdo it, I suppose I would rather have health in the long run for these guys. But having that happen, it was just tough. And it put this team in a position where now they had these younger guys playing, and the defense really hasn't had that many penalties. They've had a few, but special teams have been a little bit of a killer as well. Towards the end of that game, there was an 18-yard return by Dante Fleming. It brought it up to what would have been Tulane's 45-yard line. There was an illegal block in the back, and now they're on their 16. And they're down with that 5-point deficit, but now instead of having to travel about half the field, now you're having to drive the entire way. And the defense could very quickly figure out in these long situations to just send pressure on a really young quarterback. So I think that there is a path to victory that involves Tulane really eliminating themselves as opponents first and foremost. But I think a lot of the time penalties show a lack of discipline. To me, you can't be an undisciplined team and make the comebacks in the stands that they've been able to have in these last couple of weeks. That's a team that's going to fall apart, not make a 3-and-out start, not being in the position to read the quarterback's eyes like Tyler Grubbs did, return that for a touchdown, then make 2 3-and-out stands. But at the same time, the penalties do just start to kind of pile up, and you can only really have so much fight mean something at the end of the day. And there's only so much that you can kind of keep talking about being able to keep bouncing back where, you're no longer shooting yourselves in the foot. But I think where that could point to a lack of discipline. I think it just points to a lot of young guys trying to play together, a completely different offensive system that involves a lot more pre-snap motion. It's gonna take a little bit of a while to get used to. But while these games are really important for people looking very far ahead from a college football perspective, ultimately there is so much football left to be played. And, the season for Tulane can't be wrapped up in two non-conference games that ultimately they mean something, but they don't mean anything to what this team's season goals are: to win the state of Louisiana, reach the conference, win their conference championship, reach the college football playoffs. Yes, you can arguably say that this had a ding on that, but it is what it is. They were two really hard-fought losses for Tulane. Now they have to kind of win out for the rest of the year in order to have a shot at those college football playoffs, but it just goes to show how easily things can go one way or the other. And all they really have to do is just keep winning their way down to the end of this season, where you really want Memphis to continue to be successful like they are. You get those two matchups against them. And I think this year it's going to be curious to see how much level of competition is really going to play into things. But how much that plays into rankings is one thing. I think for Tulane as a team, where it's going to play in for them is the play speed of these opponents, and having these hard-fought matchups go down to the wire, being played at a completely different speed than what any of their conference opponents have really played back-to-back. Yes, Memphis played Florida State. Yes, USF played Alabama. Those were games that, Memphis ended up winning. USF made a credible stand until things got a little out of control at the end. But Tulane had two back-to-back marquee matchups, and they really, really fought to the end of each game. Obviously, you'd feel a little bit better if you were coming out of this 2-1. But I think you have a team that's really hungry for a victory. And I wouldn't say angry, but maybe just a little frustrated at the fact that they've been so close 2 weeks in a row. And they're a team that has really high season hopes. A win this weekend is going to be really important. And I think that you could safely say that there's going to be no worries whatsoever about Tulane overlooking the Ragin Cajuns heading into conference play. The fact is, this is a 1-2 team. It's the way that John Summerall has started every season as a head football coach, and he has not lost a game as a coach thereafter. So this is going to be territory for him that he's familiar with, and it's going to be really important for them to get this one right going into this weekend. But getting this win in the state of Louisiana, it does mean a lot to this team. There are a ton of guys on this team that are from Louisiana. There are guys like Dante Fleming who came over here, probably a lot of guys that got a lot of attention, kind of these lower level guys that ended up coming to Tulane. The state of Louisiana, you're really trying to win the recruiting battle here. And John Summerall really sees the value of a win like that for the long run. So I think just all of kind of the planning and vision going into each one of these games has been really exciting to watch. Just John Summerall's both short-term and long-term visions play out in concert with one another, not either being at the expense of one another. But it's very curious as well, because this is going to be the first chess match really that we'll see of John Summerall. Yes, he had his experience as a player and as a former assistant coach with Kentucky, playing in SEC environments, coaching in SEC environments, but we haven't seen him go toe to toe really yet with someone that he knows and is familiar with in the way like we are this weekend against the Ragin Cajuns, where that was a conference opponent for Troy for the last 2 seasons and one that gave them fits. They went down for his first year as the coach at Troy. His team went down 17-0 against the Ragin Cajuns. They ended up winning the game. They are 2-0 in those 2 games, but it just goes to show that this is a team that's not going to sleep at the wheel here, but it's going to be one that John Summerall kind of knows how this team works at this point, but so does the opposing coach. And the thing about these couple of games for Tulane, yes, they've gotten a lot of experience, and the level of the game of football, the speed of which they played is just so much greater than everyone else's. You can't go into those games and play a vanilla type game plan and expect to win. Even though their goals are to win the conference championship and are focused on conference play, obviously you want to win the big games, and you just can't do that without showing your cards to a degree. So there is quite a bit of credible tape on Tulane at this point, but it's kind of one of those things that I think Tulane moving forward, they're not going to be mismatched in skill in a way that they've kind of had to go up against these Power 4 opponents. I think they'll have the advantage moving here on out. And it's going to kind of be that Bill Belichickian, can you shut us down in the best way? Can you shut down our best players? Make us beat you using our weaknesses. I think that's going to kind of be the way that teams approach Tulane moving forward. Even though they've showed their cards, they've still showed the ability to be dominant in a lot of different ways. And I think where, play calling here or another, you could pick that apart. I think what we've seen is a very exciting game be called these last couple of weeks, and coaches that aren't afraid to go for it, despite having a redshirt freshman quarterback who, yes, he made mistakes. This was a very tough environment for a guy in his third start. You go back to Michael Pratt, how he played as a true freshman, and you could see a little bit of those mistakes as well. But you also are seeing that's experience that is invaluable for someone. And if you see him as a future of this team, he is not going to face a defense coverage-wise like he saw against Kansas State. And Darian Mensah, again, he's taken some tough hits. He's had some mistakes where he's shown himself to kind of be like a redshirt freshman. Where he's not like a redshirt freshman is how he continues to go out there with poise and keep this team together. Something I always really thought said a lot about the team's belief in Michael Pratt was the way that they battled down to the wire in all of those games, where a defense in the Cotton Bowl couldn't make a stop for a damn thing the whole game. All of a sudden they lock in, they are lights out because they know they have the opportunity now, get the ball back in our quarterback's hands, and we can win this football game. I don't think you see the 3-and-out stops back to back in 2 fourth quarters now against Power 4 opponents. They were having difficulty containing the rest of the game from this defense if they didn't have a strong belief that the offensive side of the ball would get it done. And outsiders can kind of look all they want, but I think a team's belief in one another, how that is in the locker room and how it is on the sideline, to me, I've seen nothing but belief, leadership, and they've talked about this adversity response where they all yell good. I have heard it a couple times now, and I've got to say the psychological effects of that do matter to me, because the way this team has fought and just continued to have adversity, yes, some self-inflicted, a lot of it is not, happened to them. They just keep steamrolling on through it like it's a day in the park. And that, to me, that is really what makes or breaks a championship contender. And we're going to see really what they have to do this weekend. But you have a team that I think has a little bit of something to prove, and they're going to lay it all out on the field this weekend. And I'm just going to end this with what I think is trending up. And I think that that's something to really make notice of on a team that is still largely trying to figure itself out. I think that while the offense, it was a tough outing for them on that side of the ball, having a guy like Dante Fleming step up as a leading receiver in that game, that really was important to see. And I really liked that despite having that return for him being nullified by a penalty. And I think a lot of him fair catching that, just kind of getting comfortable with it. But I really liked that he started to take off and make some returns for Tulane. And this is a homecoming for him, being that he transferred over from the Ragin Cajuns 2 seasons ago for Louisiana, or to come over to Tulane. So this game really means a lot for him on that side of the ball. But on the defense, to me, I think really what the bright spot for me in this game was you're starting to see a little bit of production out of this pass rush finally. Jackson Arnold was a lot more mobile of a quarterback than I anticipated. I think this team anticipated. And he was a lot stronger of a guy, kind of reminded me of the Virginia Tech quarterback, just hard to bring down, almost kind of like Michael Pratt in that same kind of manner. But the pass rush has been a point of issue for Tulane through these first couple of games. Someone that I thought really stuck out in this game was Javon Carter, who we hadn't really seen up to this point in the year. He had come over from, I'm going to pull this up now just to make sure I have it. He came over from an FCS program, but he was injured during training camp, and we hadn't really seen him throughout the first couple of weeks of the season. And I don't have his transfer information. Grambling State, there we have it. His length immediately stuck out. I noticed 97 out there. I told Corey, I'm like, I think that this is a new player. I think it's Javon Carter. I went and looked it up today, and he's 6'4", 258, I want to say. It's pretty much exactly the same size Devin Deal was for this team. And I have to say they look pretty similar body type wise, where his legs are a little longer than you would kind of expect, but having that extra length there, you could see how much it made a difference, especially against a Power 4 opponent like an SEC line in Oklahoma. Terrell Allen has kind of been that starting bandit opposite Matthew Fobbs-White, kind of battling for that time. Michael Lenz has been in the fight there as well. Then Shaquem Leister, who continues to be a very interesting player on those passing downs. He really is a disruptive guy out there. But I think a lot of the size that you lost in Keith Cooper, Darius Hodges, and Devin Deal, you get a lot of that back in Javon Carter. He moves pretty well and he has good length. And I thought Aiden Huntington also on his side of the ball really started to break through. He's a guy that's going to get held. He got held with those 2 Power 4 opponents, and it's going to kind of keep happening the rest of the season. I saw it on tape when he played Ole Miss last year. That's what happens when you're a dominant guy. You have to essentially learn how to fight through that. And I think you started to see him fight through that this weekend. I think the linebackers have also added a lot to Tulane's pass rush, and they've really made a huge stand for me. But to me, the really exciting bright spot and kind of trending up for me is the coverage starting to come together under a very young group of safeties. Bailey Despaney was a leading tackler for Tulane with 9 tackles in a quarter and a half before he went out with the targeting call. Kevin Adams really came in for him in his place, and he is really sticky in coverage. But that moment was not too big for him, and that is really, really impressive. We look at Jalen Geiger, his experience playing for Kentucky at an SEC program and in these environments as mattering a lot. The fact that a guy like Kevin Adams was able to go in there and really make a lot of stands, that to me says so much about this team's development. And I think when you could see an improvement in all 3 phases of a defense, especially one that I think was struggling to kind of find their footing throughout these first couple of matchups, to have 3 sacks against an SEC opponent, it really just can't be discounted. And it was against a little more mobile of an opponent that you might have given them credit for. Yes, they had some injuries on the offensive line. You could still just see how much of a difference in the trenches just having those big SEC guys really is. But the fight to me really came through in the pass rush. And you can worry a little less about some of those things on the back end of a defense if you're able to get there with their front 7. But we were not really seeing that through 2 games for Tulane. We also weren't seeing them really get that together in coverage either. But I think just the stepping up on the defense, the way that they held that game down and gave their offense a chance to bounce back, that to me really says it all. I think the defense has been the heart and soul of Tulane's team for a lot of these past couple of years and have made those critical stops. Like in that Kansas State game, they were the ones that got it done on that side of the ball. They held Kansas State to 10 points. Tulane's offense could only score 17 in that victory in 2022. Yes, that game ended up 34-19, but all things considered, while it was still a critical game, holding an SEC opponent 24-19 when they started the game, went into halftime 21-0, and we're in the fourth quarter with a 5-point deficit for Tulane, being a 24-19 score. That is a hell of a turnaround for me by the defense, and it's one that I think they can really look forward to shaping up and being a strong side for Tulane this year. And again, keep saying this weekend's a chance to get it right. I don't even know if that's so much the case. I think it's just a chance for them to really show who they are again and just remind people that this Tulane team is here to stay.